Hello, and welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pamela Cohn, and I'm delighted to serve as the host for this podcast series. Today, we are so fortunate to have with us Matt Sparks, the Sustainability Director at Linklaters in the UK. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So let's start with, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into the sustainability space?
Well, it's funny how life circles, really. So just as a quick aside, for any of your listeners who were students of geography or may have children who want to study geography, and geography is a much maligned subject, I find. It's much more than colouring in. You know, I did geography at university. It's funny thing how things turn out, because that is all about how the world works, how different aspects of the world function, bump into one another, interact. And I sort of, that's really where I find myself now in a grown-up job. So as an aside, I say geography has its place, and I think its place is just getting more important as time goes on, actually. So I started there, but like many, went to university, got a graduate job, which was with Barclays, typical sort of graduate scheme, got a taste of many different things. Ended up doing quite a lot of volunteering on the side alongside a project management role. Quite enjoyed that. Then got into the whole idea where it's quite interesting how the business bumps into society, this interface, and what's the responsibility of business towards society. And Barclays was and is a big, accountable public name, and what was expected of us as that in communities. So I started doing a role that worked with communities across the West Midlands, so in the UK, urban areas like Birmingham, rural areas across the Welsh borders, which was fascinating. And I got very interested in the whole, as I say, the whole aspect of what's our responsibility, what's our duty, and what's expected of us as an organization in communities. I got so interested in it, I then left Barclays to set up and run a charity that was focusing on urban and rural regeneration in the Midlands of the UK, which was a view from the other side, really. I've gone from sort of funding not-for-profits to running one, which again, as an aside, was excellent experience in terms of, I had a director who told me once that it's very easy to maintain a career in a big organization and not really be responsible for a bottom line. Well, if you're running a charity, which is a small business, essentially, you are responsible for everything. So that was great, really challenging. I became a jack of all trades, master of none, from fixing the IT to opening the door in the morning, to organizing the cleaning, to just talking with stakeholders, to running projects, but a really good way to engage and understand social challenge, real social challenge, absolutely the front line on the ground, and so on. After a few years, though, I was looking for probably a return to what we would now see as corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, and the Linklaters role came up, which was, a fairly extraordinary change. I moved from talking to local authorities, local councils in the UK, with a plastic beaker full of water in a broom cupboard, essentially, to the rarefied surroundings of a law firm. But I was brought in to do the community job. So in our context, that's community investment, as we called it then, and pro bono, and that was my world. And since then, and that was 2008. So I joined about 3 months before Lehman's collapsed, which in many respects for me was pretty good timing, because since then it's been all about trust in business and the role of business, and to a degree suspicion of business. What's the purpose of business? So I suppose I came in at the front line on the social side, but since then, over that 16 years is a long time to be anywhere. So why have I been here this long? Well, I suppose because the agenda has grown since, and expectations have grown since. The firm's commitment to the agenda has grown, and hopefully I've just about kept up with all those things to justify staying in position. So yeah, so I would say, in the context of sustainability these days, I've got quite a traditional, I would say, sort of community derived, but then quite generalist background. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an environmental specialist. I'm probably not a specialist at very much at all, but I am, I would hope, reasonably good at a variety of things, and more importantly, have in a legal context, in a law firm context, become effective at influencing and engaging and agitating It's the word I use most often to get stuff done. So whilst my heart is always sort of community, I've built from that here a wider portfolio, which, as I say, is aligned and complementary to where the firms needed to be.
And if your experience is anything like mine was when I was in corporate, the advantage of having been with your firm for 16 years is you have the relationships to influence where influence needs to happen, right? So I always feel a little bit for people who are starting in sustainability or ESG and are coming into a company or a firm cold and expected to affect cultural change. The advantage, if you've been there 16 years, is you know how the firm functions and you know how to affect change where change is needed. So that's a huge advantage. I'm guessing that's your experience, or you wouldn't have been at Linklaters for 16 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as I said, certainly the wider the sustainability remit has become, I mean, almost beyond simply community and pro bono in my case, the less you can do yourself.
Yes.
I am responsible for those things. That is down to me. Almost everything else, and to an extent, a lot of that is reliant on goodwill of other people, but almost everything else is in the day job of somebody else.
Yes.
And I can only do that by persuading them that these things are a good idea. Now, to starting afresh somewhere, you're right. You need to know all the right people in the right places. They need to believe you. I do think that particularly in a legal context, a law firm, you need 2 or 3 years to build up a credibility with many lawyers to get stuff done.
Yes.
And I think I would, I've been here a long time. I would be quite frustrated for the first 2 or 3 years in a new place, building up that credibility. Whereas at the moment, if something needs to be done, I tend to know the right person.
Yes.
I tend to know all the right people. I tend to know the order of play among those people, the particular buttons or rationale that different people will respond to. And if you need to gather a bunch of people together, which you need to, and what the governance looks like and the order of play. And, so much of that is learned by experience. And again, just, it's quite interesting because occasionally you'll interview people for roles who'll come into the interview extremely enthusiastic about all the things that you should be doing better, which is very an interesting approach. And you sort of think, well, actually, come in and see quite how hard it is. And actually, the only way you can, we might talk about some of the agitation that we're beginning to see outside of the organization around us, but a lot of that is black and white and quite absolute. Whereas actually within a commercial context, not just here but anywhere, there are many shades of grey. Nothing is simple. Nothing is straightforward. And I do think, I can get things moved along here much faster because I know people, and more importantly, probably they know me.
Yes.
And I will sell things that are worth selling.
Yes.
I won't be bothering them.
You built up the trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand the business, and we operate in a world that isn't black and white. There are many competing priorities here. One of them is mine, but there are others. And we are compromise is a sort of misused word, but there's an element of sort of sensible, rational conversation and arriving at the best outcome for everyone. Occasionally we win 100%, sometimes we lose 100%. Most of the time we all come out in a satisfactory position for the sort of firm we are, in the sort of environment we're in, underpinned by the fact that my job is to make sure that we are a responsible business. And very simply, my job is to make sure that everybody in the organization can confidently tell their friends, their family, their clients, their colleagues that we are a responsible business. And that, essentially that is all I do. I have to give people the confidence that they can say that about us.
So you touched a little bit on young recruits who are eager to come in and change things. Actually, it's quite exemplary that Linklaters has been working at this for, in your case, 16 plus years, right? But for a law firm who's just getting started, what tips would you give them or the person they hire? What would you tackle first if you were just coming into the position today?
I think coming into a firm which hasn't touched this formally before, and it's a bit like any SME, a small medium enterprise, small business, you don't know quite how sustainable you are already till you start looking, because a lot of the the checks and the balances and the good governance and the good behavior and the systems and discipline that you have in place will be setting you up quite well for, many sustainability angles already. You add on to that some of the probably quite cost-effective measures you take on to reduce your energy consumption. Some of the goodwill you're generating and showing towards your local community, some of the efforts you have made for lots of good reasons to become slightly more diverse. And you'll probably find you're in pretty good shape already. So I think a lot of the time it's about organizing, understanding, representing in a sense, and then using that as your foundation of what you do next. So I do think, there's a lot of quick wins to be had if you've been given this. And quite often, we'll get clients, whether it's law firms or not, but we'll get clients calling up and the GC will be given this gig, this corporate responsibility, sustainability gig, exactly, because they were the ones around the table at the time. It's perceived if you don't do it, it's a risk, therefore we'll chuck it to the GC. And the first thing you would have say to them is, well, actually, it's absolutely not as bad as you think. You've probably got 75%. If you were a well-run business doing the right thing, you're 75% there already. What you're not doing probably, and unfortunately, is some of the more tedious stuff, which is reporting to this and disclosing to that and whatever else. But in terms of the doing, you're probably in pretty good shape if you're a pretty good business.
That's so similar to the advice that I give my clients when they call me and say they want help. I'm like, the first thing we have to do is take an inventory, because you are already doing a lot of things. You're just not managing it or measuring it or directing it, but a lot of good stuff is already happening, and you're already halfway there, right? So,
and the other thing I think you can do is, and it's a bit of a cheat, I suppose, but look at what other people like you are doing already, because they won't be far wrong. Therefore, you won't be far wrong. And I think some of the question marks around for us at the moment around materiality assessments, what we should be asking our stakeholders what they think we should be doing. It always seems a bit duplicative for 100 firms to be asking the same questions of essentially the same clients who will be looking at them in exactly the same way and presumably giving them, well, you would hope giving them the same answer. I'm not convinced they do. And I think that sort of in itself undermines the exercise sometimes. But essentially, you won't be much different from people like you. And if they've invested time and effort in working out what matters to them, those things probably matter to your clients and to your people and to your suppliers and to your world as well. So the other advice I give is just see what the neighbors are doing. Look at what you're doing, see what the neighbors are doing. Where there's a gap, you might want to work at that. That's probably a good thing to focus upon. And then the other thing I say is if you are starting fresh, you've also got slight advantage of starting with a bit of a clean sheet. If you've been and the greenwashing piece is less important if you've never gone out there and shouted before. If you're carrying a bit of baggage, that's one thing. But if you're not, you can probably carve out quite a distinct, interesting USP.
Yes.
Having never done anything before in the space. So I do think there's plenty of opportunities. And yeah, just to close on that one, I'd also say always look at this. And I'm as bad as anybody at this. Sustainability is absolutely as much about opportunity as it is about risk. And I think at the moment, the risk is we look at it too much about risk management and not enough about opportunity, not just on the commercial side, but just as a right thing to do for a whole host of good reasons. It brings lots of opportunity, not just mitigating risk.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You mentioned earlier being aware of what others that look like you are doing. What are you seeing as sort of the latest, greatest, hottest emerging trend around ESG with respect to law firms?
I think particularly for law firms, and I've mentioned it a couple of times a bit dismissively, is the disclosure piece. So we have reported for a long time, and expression I use, we've reported on our own terms for many years. We've always, you've mentioned the fact that Linklaters has been doing this for a long time. We've been doing it for a long time, reasonably quietly and on our own terms, because it's been the right thing to do. Some of the environment stuff to save money, human rights, where we want to do that. Some of the rest of it is better process and better systems, better ways to run a business. But we've done it on our own terms. What we're seeing now is obviously a shift to not being able to do it quietly. We've got to tell people, otherwise they think we're not doing anything. And we've got to start doing sustainability on other people's terms. This index and this framework and this proposal or pitch or whatever it might be. So in a sense, the game is being sort of taken out of our hands now, and we're having to sort of dance to other people's tunes much more. And I think the real hot topic here and in places like this is the cultural impact of that for organizations and people who are not used to having their head above the parapet, who are pretty used to being very successful organizations below the radar. We're now being dragged up. We're now being expected to behave like a corporate when, in our case here, we're a partnership. And we're not a partnership. We're partly a partnership because we didn't want to be a corporate. But now effectively we are. So we're having to get used to, not only disclosing much more, and of course, the more you disclose, the more people are interested, but also being ready to disclose a lot more. So in our case, we've got plenty of behaviors that don't have systems. We have plenty of systems, I would say, and processes that aren't formalized. And we have plenty of formalized systems and processes that aren't public. Quite a lot of the legislation, CSRD in Europe particularly, is bringing us to a point where if you're not disclosing something in the public domain, it might as well not exist. So there are a whole host of things that we and firms like us do that have performed perfectly well for many, many years without, some of them never ever even documented, but many of them certainly never shared publicly, yet we're now being expected to share that publicly, otherwise it doesn't count. And that's really difficult. And of course, we've got the pressure there of, we have a strategy here, part of which says we will practice what we preach. So we deliver ESG advice to clients. We will deliver that, we will take our own medicine in that sense. So we can't say, well, we're a different sort of business. It doesn't really matter. We don't need to do that, because we need to demonstrate that we're doing the tough stuff like them. But I think for law firms, particularly, that cultural challenge where I can see over the next 12 to 18 months, I will be asking people to do things that they see quite understandably as not at all necessary. Why do I need to write that down? Why do I need to formalize that? Why do I need to start measuring that? Why do I need to talk about the governance behind that policy, that process, that little bit of the business that has worked perfectly well, untouched for generations? Now I need to formalize it. I need to take up committee time to get it signed off. I need to publish it somewhere online for it to be challenged. And I need to report on it every year. I need to show developments every year. All of a sudden, I'm generating a lot of work that in many cases may not really lead to any incremental gain for the organization. It's simply putting more stuff down on paper, but we need to be doing it to demonstrate responsibility. So there's an element of don't shoot the messenger. And I suppose this goes back to what you said at the start about being in place and having the credibility and everything else. I'm likely to be generating, let's call it unnecessary, it's not, but perception might be unnecessary work for lots of people in the short term. That will be quite hard. I will get away with it a bit more readily because they know I will only be bothering them because I have to. But I do think, whether it's I think it's more of a hot potato than a hot topic, actually. But the hot potato, I think, for all of us is dragging the firms into the spotlight when, as I say, part of the raison d'etre of a partnership is that you're not there for that. Otherwise, you would be structured in a different way. But so I think there's and I don't think that's generational. I don't think there's anything. I just think that's a complete change in how we are having to behave as a business.
So you mentioned new and different things that are coming in the next 12 to 18 months. One is these new behaviors and documentation that you've mentioned. What else should the legal profession be preparing for in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, good question. I think disclosures, as I mentioned, disclosure. I think what will be interesting about disclosure is just how far that goes. We've obviously seen the sort of pushback in the US. I think in Europe, at some point, there will be a sense that we are spending so much time doing that. We just haven't got the time to do more good stuff, whatever that might be. So I think that will happen. I think related to disclosure, there will be growing interest in, as I said earlier, the success of firms like ours. And speaking from a perspective in the UK, where we've just had a change of government, the gap over the past decade probably between the haves and have-nots, as we call it, businesses like ours that have been recurringly irrepressibly successful versus communities that have gone completely the other way, you can imagine that there will be a much greater focus on the gap and therefore those at the top end of it. So much more questioning of how the success we are seeing is benefiting others as well as ourselves. Now, I think we've got a good story to tell. Things like talking about tax may well come into play. Not something we've talked about before, the tax that we pay. We're likely to be talking about that in the near future because it's a substantial number.
Mhm.
And it's a substantial number that wouldn't exist and wouldn't be going into the treasury here in the UK if we weren't a successful business. And actually, whilst we're relatively generous in terms of our community contribution, cash, donations wise each year, that's a small number relative to the tax we pay. So
Mhm.
that's a good illustration of where we're sort of thinking, well, actually, we need to give a better account of ourselves as an organization to really demonstrate the value we're bringing. Yes, there are lots of very successful people here, but we're also contributing a colossal amount to the economy. And I think that's true sector wide. So I think that articulation of why we're a force for good is going to become really quite important. And then related to that, I suppose, final one would be, what is the voice of a firm like ours? Because we're all expected to have a view and a voice about many things these days. Again, culturally, we're not used to that. We're not used to needing a voice at all, generally. But again, the more we disclose and the more we talk about what we're doing, and again, you have to take the rough with the smooth. If we want to talk up some of the good stuff we're doing, we're inviting challenge. But that also means you invite requests for comment. And not
Right.
only that, but what memberships do you sign up to? What movements do you sign up to? What initiatives? Because they do reflect the sort of organization and what you stand for. So I think there are lots of decision points about, well, actually at that crossroads, where do we end up? What sort of firm are we, and what does the external articulation of that look like? And again, I mentioned greenwashing before. We're very nervous about being a hostage to fortune. If you sign up to something that then changes its spots down the line, where does that leave you? So does that mean you sign up to nothing? Do you sign up to everything and go with it and hope it's, as we say, tomorrow's chip paper?
Mhm.
Or do you try and navigate a line there? But again, there are many different equal views in a place like this that have to be factored in.
I was just going to say that, and that's making those decisions is exponentially more challenging when you're in a partnership versus a traditional corporate structure where the CEO and the board can make those sorts of decisions and everybody else falls in line. That doesn't happen at law firms or any partnership that I'm aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you've got the other angle of, it's an increasing habit of clients,
Mhm.
understandably, to want their supply chain to sign up to a range of different movements, initiatives, standards, whatever it might be. And of course, clients have the slightly annoying habit of sometimes selecting different standards and indices. And there's a limit to how much one organization or a bunch of individuals can actually maintain an enthusiasm for filling in terms of
Yep.
forms and indices and stuff. So I think, again, another pinch point is, quite how many different tunes we're dancing to. And every partner's client matters, clearly,
Yes.
and every client's supply chain management has thought long and hard about what they're going to be asking of their suppliers. But at the sharp end of it, that means an awful lot of variations on a theme, but those variations will require a little bit more work, and we can't sign up to everything everywhere, because otherwise we will spend our time talking about what we've done and
Yep.
never doing anything fresh for next time.
Yep.
So yeah, again, I think that's a real crunch point for the sector.
So, my favorite final question to ask of all of my podcast guests is, given this tumultuous, evolving, challenging environment that we are functioning in as sustainability practitioners, ESG advisors, what gives you hope?
Lots, lots gives me. I tell you what gives me the greatest hope, and is a real pleasure, is that when you start talking to people internally about this stuff, get them one-to-one, get them talking about their day job and how they can help you achieve what you need to achieve. And this is absolutely as much on the non-legal side as it is the legal. In fact,
Mm.
particularly on the non-legal side. How excited people get at being given an opportunity, generally, and well, actually not generally, almost always, to do something they've sort of wanted to do but haven't had the license to do it because the sustainability argument hasn't been the same as the cost one or the quality one or the speed or whatever it might be. Giving them license to say, well, actually, can you have a look at this for me, please? Can you see what your suppliers are doing? Can you help me work out the footprint of this, or the the human rights story of that, or the points we award to this, or how you factor into pricing? The second you start asking the questions, the vast majority of people become real advocates. They were sort of quiet, frustrated advocates before, and you've given them the opportunity to get their teeth into something that actually they're really passionate about. And it might be because they've always been interested in it. It might be because they've got kids who are asking them about what they do in their day job and how it makes a difference, and what about this law firm. It gives them a point of reference and something to get their teeth into. So almost without exception, I am surprised and delighted when I go to new parts of the business and say, well, we've never bothered you before, but actually you've got something really helpful to us now. Can you lend us a hand? Can you spend a bit of time exploring this, or bring a group together to do that, or simply telling me a bit more about what you do? And invariably people will be delighted to do it. So what gives me hope is there are lots of unlit candles, let's call it that. I don't know what, but whatever it is, there's, well, let's continue with that. Lots of unlit candles that, it turns out are actually quite easy to light. If I continue that sort of slightly painful analogy, we're getting, brighter and brighter, because we're finding we've got far more of these bright sparks, pardon the expression, across the firm, who we've managed to sort of turn on, switch on, get excited by the agenda. And it turns out they were interested all along. They were just wanting to be asked, and B, being given a license to do it. So that gives me hope, is that actually most people in a place like this, almost all people in a place like this, absolutely want us to be doing the right thing, and themselves want to be given an opportunity to do the right thing. So that gives me hope.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. That is also my experience when I was in-house, is it was never a challenge for me to engage people throughout the firm, throughout, our geographical footprint, to partake in what we were working on. And that was a breath of fresh air from when I was in marketing and was serving as the chief marketing officer, and I needed people to update their contact lists. There's nothing exciting about that, but engaging around sustainability initiatives and projects and metrics and management, everyone was enthused and engaged. So it was really refreshing.
Well, people want to know that they're working for a decent organization, and they're part of the decent people within that decent organization, and that pride of place, that pride of where you work, which I think is why this is all a very good thing for the organization too, because the many benefits of being sustainable and engaging as many people as you can in the agenda are that you end up with an organization that everybody's proud to work for, proud to be part of, tells their friends about, talks to their clients proactively, positively about. It must be a good thing. And I'm delighted by the engagement that we see.
Well, I'm delighted by the fact that we had this conversation today. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. Clearly, your experience and the work that Linklaters is doing is very impressive. Thank you again.
Thank you, Pam.